What's up, everybody? I want to talk about an interesting idea that I've seen floating around the Discord. Should you be given a version of a card if you own the proof? This is something that, I've talked about and debated about, with friends and family and people that I know, but I've seen it pop up in the Discord a couple of times. And I think it's a really interesting question, and it's not as easy to just say yes as it seems like it should be. I know one of the things I saw brought up in Discord is that it would be a lot of work for the Wonders of the first team. And that's so true. It pulling cards out of making at the factory, we had some delays getting the game, and I don't know how much trying to add complexity to that might delay future. And I think, there's always give and take to everything that we do, and that we look at doing. It's not as simple as, I want to do this, and it happens. But I think it's an interesting idea of, what benefits beyond owning the IP for that card is there for you in game. Somebody floated the idea of being able to see the ability. I think that would be much easier for the Wonders team. But, I kind of want to deep dive into this idea of getting a free version of the card. And I want to talk about, like, the way that could impact the market specifically. Somebody mentioned, and I've heard this several times, that like people should get a paper up through a formless foil of their proof. And I completely hear that. Like, as somebody who has one card in the game and it's a mythic, it's hard for me to chase. I have luckily had some help and a lot of support as I'm trying to chase that for my card. And so, the mythics are the far side of that. But I think what people maybe aren't thinking about or realizing is that from a newer player perspective, or if we look at the distribution of the proofs, I think it could actually have a negative effect on the card market. I want you to think about there are collectors in our community, and they may not agree with this assessment, and I'm sorry to those of them who disagree, but a huge part of the way that our collectors contribute to our community is by buying packs. They're chasing their cards, they're chasing complete sets. And if we have people who have, average player has probably right now one or less proofs in a set. There are collectors that we have in the community that probably have 4 or 5 or more cards in each set, especially when the card list is released and they can start hunting those proofs, which good on them for that. Good on them for being able to, have the capital to do that, to be able to do all these things. But if our biggest collectors have a large portion of the cards that they need to collect, there's a chance that they might buy less because they need to pull less. Furthermore, for Joe Schmoes, I say that with all kindness as a Joe Schmo myself, that's at least one less card that you can hit of that specific card. It's really like 3 less. For a common, that probably doesn't really matter. For a mythic, it may not matter, but there's a chance that it does. There aren't a ton of mythics. There aren't a ton of those more rare cards. And I think Grace's opinion here, and look, I'm happy for y'all to disagree with me. Would I love to have to be given paper through formless foil of my card? Yes. But I'm trying to put on my big brain hat and think about the larger implications, because, you know, if we concentrate the places where the cards are, and if the cards are in, you know, a majority of people's hands, and our collectors aren't buying as much and selling and giving away as much, and as much isn't being ripped, and there's fewer cards because those cards have been taken out of circulation, it does affect the market. And I think a huge part of what makes our community work so well is people helping each other, you know, chase their, you know, individual proofs, and, you know, working together to help everyone complete what their version of a complete collection is. So, you know, I love the idea in theory. I think in practice, the idea of everybody receiving, you know, a paper through formless foil, a something of a proof that they own, could have some really drastic impacts on our community. And I think, you know, part of the biggest point of a CCG, TCG, whatever you want to call it, Wonders is a CCG, but, you know, the point of a card game like Wonders is to collect, is to be part of a community, is to interact with people and trade and sell and create value or lose value and do all these things. And I worry that if we're taking away a reason for people to do that, or a reason for people to trade and participate in the community, we're doing the game and the purpose of the game a disservice, because it is to play and it is to collect, trade. However you collect, it is to interact with a community. And I am not every player, but there are players who would be less likely. Like, I'm going to go out and interact because I like to interact, because I'm an introvert, but I like having friends and being interactive. But there are players who, if they had every card that they wanted, would just peace out. And I think that defeats the purpose of what we're trying to create. And so, you know, like I said, I think it's good in theory, not so good in practice. But I definitely love to hear a couple of other opinions, especially given the points that I've kind of made here, and some other, like, you know, have I missed thinking about something? Have I not thought about mention something that y'all are thinking about with regards to this? I'm just kind of I'm not super excited. I'm really interested to hear what other people's opinions on this are, you know, outside of the benefit to them as an individual, on like how they think it would affect the market. So as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and keep being your wonderful selves.